How's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing just great. Doing just great. Right before we hit record, I was admiring the plates in your background there. So from one meathead to another, that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, we this turned out to be the cheapest way to add square footage to our house in Silicon Valley was to just sort of retrofit the garage. And when I did so, I threw in a little garage gym. So
Oh, that's your. Oh, I guess it is your garage. Yeah, that's
yeah,
what
it
you can
doesn't look
tell.
like it, right?
No, it looks like a. I thought it was a room. Then I noticed the garage door, and I was like, oh, there
Yeah,
we go.
yeah.
You got your skier or your row erg over there. I'm looking at mine right there. Concept two. Great torture device.
Yeah,
So.
I was literally just going to call it a torture device. Yeah.
hmm Yeah, that's awesome. Well, for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Chris. I am an engineer by trade is the way I always describe it. So I spent about 15 years in the software industry, mostly for two companies. One of them was LinkedIn, and the other one was a fintech company called WePay.
Oh, nice.
And over the course of that time, I mostly spent time in infrastructure, running infrastructure, building infrastructure. Specifically, I was involved in with the Hadoop ecosystem while I was at LinkedIn. And then I was involved in the Kafka ecosystem as well while I was at LinkedIn. And there I built a stream processing system called Apache Samza,
Oh, yeah.
which is kind of like Flink, sort of pre-Flink Flink. Then I transitioned over to WePay, where I ran the data infrastructure team there. I was involved with Airflow early on, did a lot of
Sick.
the initial Google Cloud integrations for Airflow, and I think I was the either the champion or mentor for them as they went through Incubator at Apache.
Wow.
Um, and also ran payments infrastructure there briefly, where we built a system kind of like Kafka, but using Quorum architecture instead of leader follower architecture to be able to handle, zonal or regional outages a little bit better.
Mm.
So I left WePay about 3 years ago, and since then I do kind of four different things. One is I write a little newsletter called Materialized View, where I try to do weekly infrastructure updates about what's going on in the industry. The second is as part of that, do a little bit of investing. I have a small investment fund called Materialized View Capital that invests in pre-seed to A infrastructure and dev tools companies. The third thing I do is I'm helping Martin Kleppman with the second edition of Designing Data Intensive Applications, which
Ah,
is
yes.
sort of the distributed systems Bible. So I've been working on that with him for a few months now, and I was actually just looking at a PR before this. And then last thing, the fourth thing is SlateDB, which is an open source project that I launched along with some folks from Responsive back in, gosh, we started working on it early this year, maybe March, April, May, that timeframe. And then we opened it up around August. And since then, I've been sort of continually adding features and people and releases and stuff. So, and SlateDB is a LSM built on object storage. So you can kind of think of it like
Interesting.
RocksDB. Instead of writing to local disk, it writes to, S3 or GCS.
hmm So you do a few things and throw weight around. That's cool. That's really, so, I mean, it seems like your career's really been at the sort of the atomic level of systems as far as I can tell and what I've read about you. What is it about systems that attracts you?
It's a good question. So I think when I started my career, I actually started at PayPal. And I was on what they call their advanced concepts team, which was really kind of like a data science team before there was data science. And I was working on data visualization and essentially exploring the PayPal data. And while I was there, we had Teradata,
Mm.
which was sort of this data warehouse that was very large and somewhat slow. So I was having to use this thing and kind of like not very happy with it. And I came across this Hadoop thing and I got really interested in it as sort of
Around what year was this?
this was probably 2008.
Okay.
Sorry, no, 2006, 2006,
Okay.
2007. Yeah. Um, so I'm trying to remember in terms of versions, it would have been, somewhat early in the Hadoop process,
That's
but
pretty
I,
early.
I found a video from Jeff Hammerbacher from Facebook, I think, where he was talking about Hadoop, and I was like, "Oh, this makes a lot of sense." It's very different from the Teradata approach, and So I got interested in that, decided I wanted to work on it, and moved over to LinkedIn and was started on the data science team at LinkedIn as well.
Oh,
And my first real project was to productize the people you may know algorithm at LinkedIn, which at the time was running on Oracle, an Oracle instance, and it was doing this giant self join to do friends of friends, and it was just like not working anymore. There were just too many connections, and it was tipping over. And so we tried Astrodata, we tried Greenplum, basically all these databases to try and get it to run at a reasonable rate. And then eventually we gave up and tried Hadoop, and that worked. And not only did it work, but I could see a percent bar. So I knew like how the progress was going, like when it was going to be done, when it failed, like did it run out of memory, like what happened. And so there was kind of an aha moment there where I was like, okay, like this is nice. Like,
hmm.
like we're able to now ship the model every day instead of every 6 weeks, right? And when we did that, we saw a huge bump in um, metrics around connections and stuff. And so I started to realize like a lot of the leverage for these products in infrastructure systems is not so much in the model as it is in the infrastructure. Like if you can just speed up the model training, or make it easier to add more features because of you've updated the data pipeline, like you can actually get massive jumps in your model performance versus like fiddling around whether you're going to do a support vector machine in SVM or
Right.
a logistic regression, and maybe you get like 1 or 2 or 3%. It's like massive jumps when you change things at the infrastructure level. So that's I think what really kind of clicked for me, and from then on, I was sort of like all in on infrastructure. And I think there was also sort of in the water at LinkedIn, sort of this scalability ethos, and like, oh, we're like Facebook, and we're gonna have a lot of traffic, and everything needs to be able to scale. Web. This is sort of the MongoDB is web scale era.
Yeah.
So I think that probably also contributed as well.
There were a lot of engineering feats that came out of LinkedIn, though. Why do you think that is?
I so the my take on it is that unlike Google and Facebook, um, those two companies had very unique problems because they were just so big, right? And so I kind of think about LinkedIn as sort of like little Facebook and little Google, where it has like problems everyone else has. And so like we could sort of the problems we were solving were, I think, more broadly applicable and more easy
Mm,
to adapt to other companies, versus like running stuff, building your own hardware like at Google or
right.
like I think Facebook open sourced their own data center stuff, and it's like, wow, this is cool, but like that's not the problem we have right now. So my take is sort of by virtue of the fact that just LinkedIn was a little bit smaller than Google and Facebook, it made some of the work that we were doing maybe a little bit more applicable to sort of the SMB and mid-tier size companies. Obviously, Google contributed a ton, like with MapReduce and Drill and all this kind of stuff. But could they take what they had built and like open source it and have smaller companies pick it up and use it? Like not really. Like even gRPC was a huge lift for even protocol buffers was a huge lift for them to like
Yeah.
make it work outside their company. So I kind of think of as maybe a smidge more like a Yahoo kind of thing back in the day where not quite as big as Google, but solving important problems. So that's my read on the situation. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that came out of there. It was a really cool team. Really fun time to be there.
Hmm. Yeah, a lot of cool stuff. I remember Samzo when that came out. That was cool. And then Kafka's obviously the big one. It was a huge company started, it kind of spawned off of it. And I don't even know how many other open source projects came out of it. I probably hadn't
Yeah,
heard
let's
of.
see. Voldemort was a key value store that's
Voldemort.
kind of defunct now, got replaced by
Yeah.
Venice, which is now open
Venice. Yep.
source from LinkedIn. And then Apache Pinot came out of LinkedIn
Yeah.
as well, which is like a Druid competitor. Um, and Druid was from one of the LinkedIn engineers when he moved on to MetaMarkets, Eric Cheddar, as well. So there's lineage there. Data Hub is another one that came out
Yep.
from Shorshanka and company with Acral Data now. Um, yeah, I'm sure there are others that I'm blanking on too.
That's impressive though. I guess another question I've always had, maybe you have the answer, but why was it that uh, people at LinkedIn decided to open source and put this out in the market? I mean, because it seems like there's a certain amount of overhead that comes along with that as well. Like instead of
Yeah,
just
that's a good question. I think a large part of it was like branding and recruiting.
mm,
It made it, I think open source was a way to sort of grease the skids on hiring for engineering. You get to see what we're working on and it's this cool stuff, and then you get to work on it too and contribute and build your own personal brand and stuff. And so there, I think that was a big chunk of it. I think also philosophically, there was a little bit of like, um, if the technology is not like a competitive advantage, then like why not open it up?
sure.
There is some cost to it, but there's also like some benefit.
Hmm.
There were some things that we like didn't open source deliberately because we thought it was a competitive advantage. I think the social graph comes to mind. That's one where
Sure.
we built a few systems actually to manage connections and figure out graph traversal and stuff. And I don't think that ever got open source, although there's some papers about this thing called Liquid, which is sort of the current instantiation of that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but I think hiring was a big part of it.
It's really interesting. And then kind of segueing to the third part of what you're working on today, I think Martin Klebman came out of LinkedIn as well, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken.
actually,
So
he worked with me on Samza for a while he was figuring out sort of the book situation in Cambridge and all that. So
yeah.
he sat right next to me for a long time.
Oh, he's a good dude. I was actually just hanging out with him in Cambridge about a month ago.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah, yeah. So just yeah, he's a very pleasant guy, and I think kind of the goat when it comes to the greatest of all time when it comes to at least writing the book.
yeah.
So yeah, it's impressive though. So what's it like writing a book with
Oh
Martin?
gosh,
Oh,
it's
I guess
painful.
yeah.
What I always tell people is, don't write a book because you feel like you can. Uh, Write a book because you feel like you can't not. Like you have to really, really want to write a book to the point where like you feel like you can't stop yourself. Because it's a slog, right? At least it
Yeah.
is for me. But it's also like really rewarding. I think sort of on the micro level, when you sit down and crank out a page after a couple hours and sort of leave the desk having something that wasn't there when you sat down is just nice. It's a good feeling. And then I think getting the book out there is it's a great sense of accomplishment when that happens. So there's some like nice rewards, but you got to kind of push yourself because there's some days where just nothing's flowing, and you got to put in the work. I think I'm very much a subscriber to Stephen King's model of like just you got to it's a job and you got to sit down and force yourself to
Hmm.
do it every day, and like some days it's not going to happen and that's fine, but you got to try.
Yep.
And so that was sort of my approach.
Because you wrote
Um,
another book before, the Read Me book, I believe.
Yes, that's right. I wrote with Dmitry Ryaboy a book called The Missing Readme, which was kind of kicked off. I think he and I both kind of had the same idea at different points in time. And the thought was essentially, oh my gosh, I'm saying this thing the 10th time in my one-on-one to the 10th new college graduate. Like maybe we should just have a new college graduate engineering handbook kind of thing. And so that's kind of what we wrote, although it's kind of, I would say it's been expanded more to address not just new college graduate, but also, software and even senior and staff as well.
Yeah.
Um, and it's more like not soft skills, but like nobody teaches you how to do Jira or Kanban, not Jira, but Kanban or Scrum or Agile or like how to do on call or like what is a post-mortem, all these kind of like practical professional things that you find happen mostly process oriented in a software organization that like when you land you just like don't even know, you don't know how to run even participate in a one-on-one, so
Hmm.
it's meant to get you up to speed on all that kind of stuff.
That's super cool. How long did it take you to write that?
I think probably about 18 months.
Okay.
I would say that we benefited in that regard from like COVID lockdowns because we were kind
Oh
of
yeah.
we started it like right as COVID lockdown really kicked off. And so, there was no commute, and there was not a whole lot to do other than like sit around and write book stuff. So Um, yeah,
That happened to me too. I think my book was a COVID project. I mean, you learn to bake bread or garden or make a home gym, I guess, and
right.
or write books or do all the above, really.
Yeah,
But it feels like, I mean, to tell you to exercise for a second in a workout gear, like you wouldn't have that unless you had some sense of self-discipline, because nobody in the right mind is going to get like a rower, for example, and do that on your own. So I think it takes writing a book takes, I think, a certain amount of masochism
yeah,
that just it's hard to explain to people, just like it's hard to explain to somebody why you would probably put yourself through a rowing workout on your own with no no external force.
yeah, yeah. That I totally agree with that. It's hard to explain. Yeah.
Yeah, happens. So what's I guess without revealing too much, I should be reviewing your book, I believe. The Data Intensive Applications Part Two. What are some of the things that you can talk about that are different from the first edition?
Yeah, that's, I mean, we're not keeping any secrets, so I'm happy to
Cool.
talk about it as much as possible. But the intent is to do kind of a light update and really just more bring it up to speed in current technologies rather than, drastically refactor it or change and add new chapters and stuff. So the chapters should look essentially, chapter structure wise, should look pretty much the same. I think the first couple chapters are redone a little bit, but other than that, it's pretty much the same table of contents. Um, but we're talking about, some stuff that's happened in the past decade. So, vector search and vector indexes and cloud data warehouses and the decomposition of the database and service meshes, stuff like that, right? So it's more adding new sections here and there where we feel that the technology has evolved in the last 10 years,
Hmm.
and then sort of the inverse of that as well, where we find some technologies that's fallen out of favor or that's not as important as it once was. We can kind of cut that or replace it, and so it's a light, gentle refresh, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious to see how it turns out. The Because I felt like that book could really stand on its own. Even today, it's still one of the top selling books on Amazon. I think ranking wise, it's still in the 2000s, 3000s, which is impressive considering it's a book with, I think, probably one of the worst titles could imagine for SEO. Like just trying to type that in, you'd be like, never mind. But it's done well. It's done really well. So I think it speaks volumes to just, taking the time to write a quality book. I think Martin spent years writing that, more than
Yeah, it
the
was.
author.
Yeah, I can't remember when he started, but I mean, he was sending me draft chapters of the original one. I would say 2012, 2011.
Jeez.
Yeah, something like that.
Wow.
Maybe 2012 or yeah. Uh, but in any case, yeah, the book's done really well. I don't think anyone was expecting it. It seems like kind of an obscure topic, right? And to your point on timelessness, it's funny, we kind of go chapter by chapter and read through to take notes and talk, about what we want to change and stuff. And so many of the chapters I read through, I'm just like, man, this is still like on
Yeah.
point. It's very good. There's a whole chapter on like B trees and LSMs,
Hmm.
storage layers and stuff. And it's just like, yep, this is still pretty darn accurate. There's been some evolution in LSMs in terms of things like whiskey and some of the ways that we handle compaction and stuff. But by and large, like it's all pretty pretty applicable, which is a great sign.
Hmm.
But it's fun to watch.
That's cool. So what do you like building better? Do you like writing books, or do you like building software or writing articles, or both? Like what's
Yeah, it's very very different. Very different vibe. Like with writing, especially with like newsletters, like I spend some time on it, I write the thing, I publish it, and then it's done. Like that's it, right? That thing is out there, and then I can always write another thing, but that thing is sort of immutable once it's been published. My newsletter is a write ahead log. uh, but
That's funny.
software is like never done, right? So it's just
Yeah.
perpetually. changing and evolving, and you're always having to update it and edit it. So I would say I like I guess I like small bounded writing. So that could be small bounded code or small bounded writing, which is essentially newsletter. Like
Hmm.
books to me are a lot harder to deal with because they're larger, they're a little bit more unbounded. It takes a longer period of time. And same deal with larger chunks of like huge code bases that are really complicated that you have to go spelunking in and stuff, or signing up for really big projects is not something I um it's not something that drives me. And I think one of the
Yeah.
reasons I'm happy with something like SlateDB, for example, as a project is because like it's pretty well understood how to build an LSM. Like you can look at Pebble or you can look at RocksDB or LevelDB. Like there's been decades of research on this. And so we're not really forging that much of a new path. And it's sort of like, okay, here are the features we want. We need to go and crank them out. But at some point, we're going to have a good chunk of features, and we'll still need to update stuff, obviously, and things will evolve. But I expect it to kind of reach some equilibrium and kind of be more stable,
Hmm.
um, versus larger infrastructure projects with network protocols and deployment and operational considerations and stuff. Um, that's tough. Like I did that with Samza. Those kind of systems as an open source project are just really brutal. So I like the fact that this is like a little embedded library, and it's like, well, at least we don't have to worry about all that stuff. But anyway, I guess that's how I would answer that. Is sort of the smaller bounded stuff is how I like to do it.
That's interesting. What was the motivation behind Slate?
It's a good question. A few things. I think um, first and foremost, I saw this architecture pop up with well, really a couple places. The first one was while I was at WePay, we actually built yet another graph database,
Huh?
and initially the storage was local disk, and the ops team was like, no, we're not going to support this. We're already supporting like this custom write
Oh,
ahead log
interesting.
thing you guys built and Kafka. Like you guys got to put this data in object storage. So they insisted on it. I was like, okay, that's
Really?
crazy but interesting. And it kind of made sense for the graph database because most like what we really cared about was the graph traversal stuff in memory. And so, the storage part was sort of a little bit less important. It was also, a secondary store, so it wasn't the primary source of truth for anything. Second place I came across it was WarpStream and talking with those folks. And at that point, I was like, okay, this is brilliant. This just makes a ton of sense. And they built something kind of LSM-ish internally. And then I was talking with Simon from TurboPuffer, which is a vector search, serverless vector search thing that also has kind of a semi LSM tree thing. And I was like, okay, like everyone's building these things and like keeping them proprietary. Like this should clearly exist. Why doesn't it exist? I poked around, looked at RocksDB, and found RocksDB Cloud, which is like close, but not exactly what I was after. And then sort of around that time was talking with Responsive, which is a Kafka Streams company, actually that I've been invested in. And they were essentially having the same idea and the same problem. And they were like, we're going to replace, or not replace, but we're going to add a storage option for Kafka Streams that will do object storage. And the motivation there was cost, right? And so my
Hmm.
motivation was more like, this thing should just exist. It should be open source rather than everyone rebuilding this over and over again. Like clearly this is going to happen. Let's just do it. And I think their motivation was more like cost and some additional cool functionality around, branching data and being able to test out changes and stuff without impacting the database data. It's sort of like Git for data, right?
Hmm.
I think Nessie does this as well in the data lake and some others as well. Anyway, so that was sort of the motivation for it. And also selfishly, I was like, okay, I guess I have to learn Rust now.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, this can be an excuse to learn Rust. But yeah,
That's good. What's your learning curve like on learning Rust?
it's brutal. I mean, I tried like 3 times. I kind of joke that I don't think Rust would really work as a language without AI because like if I didn't have the LLM to be able to like help me and navigate these lifetime issues and these kind of funky type syntaxes and stuff, I think I would have thrown in the towel. But I tried it
Wow.
think I tried it first in like 2022, maybe, or 2021, with the advent of code, that thing that
Mm,
happens every year. And it
yeah.
was a disaster. Like I couldn't get it to work. The generics were a mess. And like, because it's string parsing, which is not really what Rust is meant for. Like the lifetime stuff was just really getting in the way. So I completely abandoned it then. And then I got the Rustations book, the No Starch book, and read that a year later. Still didn't stick. I couldn't understand some of the lifetime stuff. The third time now has, I think, finally stuck. Like I kind of get it now. But I think you also notice, like, over the course of that time, like AI has gotten tremendously, has improved a lot. And so I code pair with with ChatGPT a lot of the time to help me out. So
Oh, that's interesting. You're not the only one. I think it's interesting. A lot of engineers I know, and pretty prominent ones at that, are all using ChatGPT now to code. I think Wes McKinney is using it for TypeScript right now for Positron. So it's like, so it is what it is. It gets the job done.
yeah, well, and for these, for languages that have syntax that you're not accustomed to, it's definitely helpful.
Yeah.
Kind of like, give me some pointers here and there. And yeah, I was messing with something the other day and I couldn't figure out why the heck it wouldn't work. And I put it into ChatGPT and it was like, oh, there's a threading issue here that's not apparent. And I actually need to use an atomic int, not a regular int. And Russ was smart enough to tell me like I couldn't use a regular int, but like the complaint it was giving me was this kind of obscure, 5 level deep stack trace about where data and lifetimes were being passed around. Send, they wanted me to attach some send trait, and I was like, what? So yeah,
What's a lifetime? I'm not a Rust guy.
yeah. So Rust doesn't have a garbage collector, and so normally, the way that you would handle this is like either you're in control of memory allocations, which is like sort of like the C malloc route, or you need some way to keep track of the resources that you've allocated and then deallocate them correctly. And the way Rust does that, you kind of have two things. One is it does a lot of reference counting. So if you use an RC or an ARC, that's their reference count or atomic reference count, you can kind of pass stuff around and it'll keep track of things. But if you don't use ARCs, then the variables you've allocated are owned by like a thing, and it can only be owned by one thing, and that is to provide some amount of memory safety and thread safety. And so that thing, I'm probably doing a terrible job, and all the Rust stations are going to come out and say I got it all wrong. But essentially, as you pass these variables around, the ownership shifts from one function to the next. And so if you're not careful, and the compiler verifies all this at compile time. So if you're not careful, you can get into a situation where like you're trying to use a variable, but you can't use it because it's owned somewhere else. So for
Hmm.
example, a concrete example would be you allocate a variable foo, and then you call some method, and that you pass in foo as a parameter there. Well, the ownership of that foo variable has now passed to the method. So that method now owns that variable. So if after you call that method, if you then say, reference foo again in the same parent
Uh,
function, you can't. It won't let you do that because it says no. You pass the ownership to this other function, like they own it now. You can't. It outlived the lifetime of this variable. Um, and so that's where you have to kind of like figure out how to navigate around this. Do you introduce a reference counter so that you can like pass it in, and clone it, or do you return the lifetime back so that you can then move on with it in the parent function? You can use static lifetimes, which are sort of like the lifetime of the process. It's a whole thing.
dang.
It's like
Okay.
all this so we can avoid like a little bit of GC,
Okay. Well, this is good to know. I was thinking about doing Rust next year. But you're right. You have to have a project to try it. I think I've learned it. I tried to learn it 1.25 times, and just
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
hard.
To be honest, like I don't think it's necessarily a problem with the lifetime model. I think it's mostly a problem with just that sort of like Russ was at the forefront of this idea and was sort of evolved over a period of 10 years as things change and learnings happen. And
Hmm.
I was looking at two things. One is how Swift handles these kind of things.
Oh
And the
yeah.
other is the one of the creators of Swift moved over to Modular, which is this AI platform company, and they are building a new language called Mojo, which is essentially
Oh
Python,
yeah. Yeah.
right? But it's without the Python interpreter, and they, much like Swift, sort of integrated and extended Objective C. Um, Mojo integrates and extends Python, and they also have this lifetime style thing that Rust has. But in my opinion, they've taken a little bit more developer friendly approach to it. And in some cases, that's going to result in like copy on writes where your performance might take a hit or things are going to take more memory. But by and large, the developers in Rust end up just like copying anyway because they're like navigating around all these lifetimes and all that ownership stuff. So I hope that we will continue to learn and evolve on the sort of lifetime approach, and we'll get some languages, and that Rust will also improve in this regard as well, so that these things are more usable. Because like they are insanely fast. It's like pretty impressive to see how fast they can perform. But boy, for my experience, coming from the Java world, it's just like, ugh, this is a different thing. Maybe the C++ and C folks are more comfortable with it.
Sure.
Um, Although on the C front, I'm really interested in Zig. I've kind of played around with it a
Oh,
little
what's
bit.
that?
It's kind of like it's like C++ is to Rust as C is to Zig. It's sort of like the
Oh
uh,
boy.
the C replacement integrates really nicely with C. There's a few really interesting projects that are built on it. One of them, which is a company I invested in, is called Tiger Beetle. It's a fintech, ledger database. Another one is Mitchell Hashimoto from HashiCorp.
Yeah.
He's working on a new terminal emulator called Ghost TTY, I think,
Interesting.
that's written in Zig. So it's like very nascent. I would say it's sort of like where Rust was 6-7 years
I'm
ago.
gonna check this out.
But it's a really interesting language. It's sort of like the polar opposite of Rust in that it is completely not memory safe. Um, but every memory allocation must be like very explicitly
Yeah.
done.
It says it right here. Yeah. No hidden memory allocations.
Yeah,
There
exactly.
you
So
go.
yeah, so it's very much about like memory usage predictability and much less about like memory safety. Whereas Rust is sort of the inverse. So one of the cool things with something like Tiger Beetle is they they can tell you essentially allocate a chunk of memory at startup time, and it like literally will only use that memory. Like it's sort of like deterministic how much memory it's going to use, and so you can get like really hyper predictable memory usage and stuff from it.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Now you give me a few things I need to go down the rabbit hole on. So thanks, Chris.
Yeah, Zig was one I also tried Advent of Code, and I got that one working. But
Nice.
Zig is still not a great um like text parsing language. I would also say that the ecosystem around Zig is much younger than Rust. So I don't think they figured out build yet. Like Rust's ecosystem with cargo and crates and all that
Mm,
is great, and Zig's, in my opinion, is sort of headed in the wrong direction. I get a lot of SBT Scala build vibes from what they're doing with their
mm.
build.zig files and stuff, and I would much rather just like copy cargo and sort of move on with things and solve other problems. But yeah,
So you mentioned companies you invest in. I guess there's a couple threads here. First, why get into investing? And second, what types of companies interest you? And I'm sure we can take it from there, but
yeah. So the on the why get into it front, it sort of happened by accident. I guess I after I left WePay, I started doing some writing and was just sort of killing time posting on Twitter and stuff. And I would get VCs reaching out to me to get my opinion on this or that, and they would introduce me to their portfolio companies or people that they were thinking about investing in, and mostly just sort of to get my take or to help provide some insight based on some opinion that I had. And I started realizing like, oh, like they're taking angel investments too. Like I could invest in some of these companies if I
Yeah.
like them. And so I started doing that sort of as an excuse to be able to continue the relationship and help them out and have a little bit of, skin in the game. Like there are a lot of cases where I was like, this is a great idea. Like I totally believe in this. I would love to invest if you have some space in your cap table. And so it kind of grew organically from there over time, over a few years. Um, and then this summer, I kind of made the call that I would set up this small fund, really to continue doing what I was doing. Because at some point I was like, okay, like I've invested money in these startups. What percentage of my net worth is invested in high risk startups? And I was like, okay, that's probably more. I'm probably at the limit for the percentage of money I'd want to put into startups. But I'm enjoying doing this. I was like, how can I keep doing this? Like, okay, well, let's do a fund. I think also a few folks in my network were kind of pushing me to like, hey, you should do this. You'd be a good fit for it. So yeah, that's how it got started. Um, and in terms of companies that I'm interested in, I think I would describe myself as kind of thesis driven. I'm very interested in certain trends uh, changes in infrastructure and companies that are riding those waves. So the object storage thing is definitely one. So as infrastructure is
Mm.
rebuilt on object storage, I think there's a window there for new companies, and I'm really interested in that. I think another one is the that I'm interested in is the sort of decomposition of the database, and really also related to that the shifting of compute. There's maybe the stretching out of compute from the client side to the edge to normal server nodes. So things like at one company I invested in recently, Electric SQL, which had did PG Lite. So now you can deploy Postgres
That's
on
dope.
your on your client side. That stuff's really interesting to me. Stream processing is always interesting to me. I have a long history of that. Um, yeah, that's sort of uh, some of the kinds of things that I'm interested. I have a few other sort of thoughts that I'm blanking on. Durable execution is another one that I think is a really interesting space right now. That's sort of the that one's interesting to me because I think like it's not a solved problem yet. It still feels like a research problem, and people are kind of figuring out the contours of what does the right API look like, and maybe there isn't one right API. Maybe it's depends on your use cases and your users and developers. Like front end engineers using durable execution might have different needs and use cases than backends payments people, for example. And so I'm really watching that space and having a lot of fun sort of exploring it.
How do you find companies and projects worth looking at?
Yeah, it's a good question. Most of my company stuff happens through discovery happens through introductions within my network. So either
Yeah.
venture capitalists I've talked to, or people I've worked with, or people that I'm talking to. So I don't really usually get into contact with companies, sort of like outreach. Um, Other than sort of by accident, by like, oh, this is a cool open source project, let me play around with it and hop on the
Sure.
Discord, and then pretty soon we're like talking, and they're like, oh, I see you're raising around, like this is interesting. But by and large, it's mostly introductions from VCs.
That's really interesting. I think you would have a quite an advantage too, just given your like your background and I think your ability to spidey sense a lot of these tools at more of an atomic level, right? I mean that
Yeah, I feel like that. Yeah. Sort of domain expert, being able to apply some of the understanding of this space. And, I do worry, like I've been out of work for like 3 years now, or I should say out of engineering for 3 years now. And so it's like, okay, did my learnings do they still apply 3 years later? Like have things
mm,
changed all that much? But so far I feel like I'm able to keep up and sort of track the trends and stuff.
does working on projects like Slate help kind of keep you in the
Yeah.
game?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was also an intent with Slate is to like, keep up with what's going on in the world and an excuse to, figure out I've never used AWS in production, for example. So to figure out AWS and use it,
Mm,
like we were all GCP at WePay, and then at LinkedIn, we were on our own data centers at the time.
right.
Um, so it was a sort of excuse to like play around in that ecosystem and get better with all that. I was playing around with local stack and data fusion and Rust and all these kind of things. So
That's
it's good.
cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, and even AWS, just learning that ecosystem is, I wouldn't say it's easy. So there's
Yeah.
there's a lot to it. Um, well, cool. Yeah, kind of closing out. Yeah, for the audience, I have to go to the airport shortly to catch a flight. It's at 1 actually. But kind of closing out, like, what are you excited about over the next few years?
Well, the durable execution stuff is definitely something
Yeah.
that I'm very excited about. Like I said, I think it's an open-ended research project. I'm also excited about just this Postgres boom. Like everything
Mm,
that's going on with Postgres, it just seems vibrant and exciting, and like it's going to solve some real problems for some real people, simplify operations a bit, make things a little bit easier, giving people a pathway between single node, OLTP database and like the whole thing, search
everything.
and analytics and everything. So I'm like really excited about those two trends. And then yeah, what else? I think to be honest, I'm excited to see where the whole Rust big data ecosystem goes. I think
Yeah.
data fusion is a really awesome project. And I think it just feels like there's a lot of tailwind pushing things forward in that space right now. There's a this sort of prolific developer, Xuanwo from DataBend, who has this whole like rewrite big data in Rust movement, and he runs OpenDAL, Open Data Access Layer, which is a Apache project. But he's just like cranking away, and I've been the more I dig into Rust and big data, the more I'm like, wow, this is actually pretty mature and like coming along quite nicely. And so I'm kind of excited. Just it just feels fresh and new.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on data tooling written in Python? Because it seems to be sort of the trend right now in the data ecosystem.
Yeah. So I mean, my take is that a lot of the data tooling is actually written in Rust, and then it's like a binding with Python. I think whether it's the data frame stuff or all the stuff like that. So I think that's great, and I think Python's here to stay.
Yeah.
I think it's great, and I'm happy to say that I like Python finally. Like
Oh, did you
the
not like it?
yeah, no, I hate it. So I really didn't like the ecosystem. Like I just felt that they completely missed on dependency management
Yeah,
and pip. Like I came from Java land and Maven, and like
it
say what you want
works.
about Java, but it has a very mature ecosystem, and
Yep.
like you know build systems work properly, and it just works. And so I felt that the lack of typing and the lack of a really good build system were holding Python back. And so they've really kind of addressed both those. I'm a big PDM user, but Poetry is like there as well.
Hmm.
You see investment in developer tooling with like Rough and UV and all that kind of stuff. Sorry, no, yeah, UV and all the
Rough.
other stuff that they're doing. Um, and so that plus the type hinting starting, say circa Python 3.8, it's actually pleasurable for me to write Python now and like things compile as they're supposed to and it actually works. So yeah, Python's here to stay. I think they've improved it a ton. And I think it's actually a nice integration with something like Rust. You start
Hmm.
seeing these self-contained binaries that are getting deployed, and you can pip install it, and it actually works properly. So, yeah, I think that part's good. I guess when I was saying the Rust stuff, I was thinking more about like the infrastructure level.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that you for the infrastructure stuff, I'd probably choose something like a Rust or a versus
Yeah,
Python.
yeah, it
Yeah.
starts to be more performance critical and all that. Uh So yeah, you have all these new query engines being built or retrofitted on Rust, which is, and then you can use it nicely in Python without having to worry about lifetimes or any of that stuff.
Amen.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, thanks for the chat, man. It's good to see you. And I guess you hopped over to Blue Sky as well recently. Is that where
Yeah, yeah,
you're?
yeah. I'm on Blue Sky at chris.blue. I also have a Twitter account, just C Riccomini, which is my last name with the C in front. I'm not as active on Twitter as I used to be. Sort of a lot of people jumped over there over the past few weeks, over there being Blue Sky, and
Yeah.
it's been good. So like I'm kind of happy with it and it's kind of working well. Yeah, so
It
that's
reminds me
where
of
I'm at.
early Twitter, like circa
I know I was
2010 or
reflecting
something.
on that. You know what it is to me is I feel that the lack of a single feed, like recommendation feed, and sort of the landing page going back to just being, people you're following,
Hmm.
really is nice. Like
It is.
I'm really happy with just seeing posts from people that I follow and maybe setting up one or two little feeds for things that I care about.
Hmm.
And yeah, it feels a lot more authentic and you know, it I find myself posting without thinking like, how is this gonna, get retweeted or
Right.
can I get enough hearts for it to show up on the recommendation feed and stuff? Like I feel more like, whatever, I'll just fire this out here, which is it's refreshing. So it's fun. I'm
It is
enjoying it.
great. Like I felt like because I've been on Threads for a bit. I got off Twitter. I had a very early Twitter account, then ditched it around the 2016 election. And this is being recorded the day after the uh, our election in 2024. And I do not miss Twitter at all. But it really, but getting on Blue Sky, I had an account, and somebody's like, "Hey, you should get back on." This is yesterday. I was like, "Fine, I'll go check it out." I was like, "It's cool.
Yeah, it's
It's like
fun.
a very cool group." Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I always have used Twitter just to essentially to keep, ironically, coming from LinkedIn, to keep in touch with the folks that I've worked with, and we chat
Yeah.
about data stuff. And so I had Twitter completely fine tuned to just see people that I follow, that I've interacted with and worked with in real life for the most part, and we have all kinds of interesting data conversations. And it was just sort of like getting worse, and like I was getting fewer posts, and the UI was breaking more, and like it was just kind of became a mess. And so yeah, and I didn't like, even though I was just using the following feed, like everyone else is still using the recommended feed, and so it sort of influences what I post, and the responses I get are from people I don't know, and yeah, so Blue Sky is a little more chill and my vibe, I guess, right now.
Yeah. Same. We'll see you back on there. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's dope.
All right, man.
Yeah. Take care.
Yeah,
Talk to
you
you
too.
soon. Later.
Bye.